You sometimes hear about some absolutely ridiculous rotations that some players claim work or are competitive with the quote-unquote proper rotations, or intuitive rotations. Usually, these silly rotations don't pop up from thin air and usually have at least some sort of logic to them. Although, typically, the worse they are compared to the proper rotation, the more likely it stems from a huge misunderstanding of how the job functions, rather than a clever observation. In this video, we will be going over 5 of these silly rotations, and I would love to hear in the comments if you know some other ones. Number 1. The Iceman Samurai. Perhaps not the most well-known alternative rotation, and with a name so clever you really need to pay attention to the samurai animations to know why it is even called such. Normally, a filler set of weapon skills for a samurai involves a full Gekko combo, a full Kasha combo, and a full Yukikase combo, followed by Midare Setsugeka. This leaves you with 60 Kenki, 1 meditation stack, and both the damage boosting and attack speed boosting buffs active. This all adds together for a combined 3006.67 potency, plus 640 that is a guaranteed critical hit from Midare Setsugeka. The Iceman rotation instead primarily applies its buffs during Mage Shisui. Gekko and Kasha grants the Jinpu and Shifu buffs while performed under Mage Shisui. Once the buffs are applied, Midare Setsugeka could then be performed. However, for the rest of the filler rotation, the Iceman works very differently compared to the proper rotation. As long as your buffs last, you simply do Hakase, Yukikase, Hagakure repeatedly, spending the Kenki on Shinten of course. This leads to an average potency per GZD of 400. The normal filler combo takes 9 GZDs to perform, meaning the Iceman rotation would be able to do 3600 potency on average in 9 GZDs. Just as a reminder, the proper rotation does 3646.67, with 640 of them being a guaranteed critical hit, making it very easy to mistake the power difference between the two strategies for being extremely close, despite this guaranteed critical hit typically being worth far more. A possible origin of the Iceman rotation may be related to how Samurai worked in Stormblood. Hagakure was a 40-second cooldown that turned your Sen into 20 Kenki each. Back then, 60 Kenki's worth of Shintens was worth more than performing Midare Setsugeka, leading to a rotation where you wanted to use Hagakure on cooldown whenever possible. Now that Hagakure has a much shorter cooldown, you can spam this using just a Yukikase combo, which is also the source of the Iceman name, as Yukikase appears to be an icy stab with the blade. And also the action name means snow wind, or something to that effect. As the proper rotation does at least 46.67 more potency, ignoring the guaranteed critical hit portion, it is clear that the Iceman rotation is objectively worse than the proper rotation, outside of some very specific exceptions perhaps. For example, if you never reach the Midare Setsugeka, like if the fight is about to end, then the Iceman rotation might just win out. I should say before moving on, that the Iceman rotation would still need to properly prepare Midare Setsugeka leading up to a burst, and maintain Higanbana properly to have a chance of keeping up with the proper rotation. And these kinds of breaks from the filler also gives Hagakure a reasonable chance of catching up. Remember, the cooldown of Hagakure is longer than 2 GZDs for a samurai. Number 2. The Dragon Cake Monk. This one is one of the most memed ridiculous rotations. Like the Iceman rotation, the Dragon Kick rotation is intended as an alternative filler sequence. For comparison, the proper Monk rotation alternates Dragon Kick and Boot Shine, Twin Snakes and True Strike, and performs Demolish once, Snap Punch twice, leading to an 18 steps long looping rotation. With everything included, the full loop is around 6174 potency, with 930 of them being guaranteed critical hits, which also leads to an included 204 potency from the guaranteed chakras. This averages to 343 potency per GZD. For comparison, the Dragon Kick rotation instead applies Disciplined Fist and Demolish, and then spams Dragon Kick until Disciplined Fist needs to be reapplied, after which Demolish is reapplied while we're at it. Every second reapplication will lead to a potential Leaden Fist boosted Boot Shine, which is worth taking, leading to a 14-step long looping rotation. Note that Demolish will typically lose 1 take due to being reapplied a bit too early this way, however, this is still better than the alternative. The full loop is around 4778 potency, with 310 of them being guaranteed critical hits, which also leads to an included 68 potency from the guaranteed chakra. This averages to 341.28 potency per GCD, or a 0.5% difference from the proper rotation. This does, however, not take into account that Bootshine gains an additional damage bonus from critical hit rate, making Bootshine do proportionally more damage the more critical hit you have on your gear, which tends to increase the better gear you have. In other words, the better your gear gets, the greater the power difference is between Dragon Kick and proper rotation. This same argument also applies for the Midare Setsugeka in the Iceman rotation comparison. The origin of this silly rotation is, simply put, that Dragon Kick has a greater potency than both Bootshine with Leaden Fist, True Strike and Snap Punch, so your only motivation to use True Strike and Snap Punch is that they do slightly more damage than Twin Snakes and Demolish if you decide to continue your combo sequence to generate more Leaden Fists. So the question becomes whether this is actually worth it. Originally, guaranteed critical hit attacks didn't gain an additional benefit from critical hit rate, so the more critical hit you accumulated, the greater your chance to crit, the more superior Dragon Kick seemed, since back then, a critical hit Dragon Kick would do more damage than a critical hit Bootshine. However, even back when that was the case, you needed a ludicrous amount of critical hit chance for Dragon Kick to effectively overtake the proper rotation in any way. Such a ludicrous amount that it was actually unreachable. A trick that relates to the Dragon Kick rotation is that if the boss is about to die and you have nothing else particularly exciting going on at the time, such as perfect balance, you can interrupt your current rotation and perform 2 to 3 Dragon Kicks before a finishing 6-sided star to round out a fight. It is important that the 6-sided star spells the end of the fight though. Number 3. The Ice Mage Black Mage. This one is actually more like the poster child of completely missing how your rotation works, and is not exclusive to Black Mage. It is, however, the best example of how wrong it can go. The Ice Mage Black Mage is signified by a Black Mage flat out refusing to use fire magic, and possibly not even thunder magic. Usually this problem is resolved somehow before they get access to polyglots, but it isn't out of the question that even unaspected magic like Foul and Xenoglossy would also be denied. The source of this problem typically is one of 2 reasons. The first one is very simple. The player just decided that they want to be an Ice Mage and so refuses to use other magic. These are the ones equally likely to avoid even thunder magic, as the problem is that they don't want to use other elements. There is very little you can do for these players other than point out that their job isn't intended to be played in this way, and hope that that makes them change. The second option is that the player does not realize the power difference between fire and ice magic, which is a far more understandable reason. These players are much more likely to also make use of thunder magic, and should it get to that, polyglots. Just reading the tooltip itself, Blizzard 1 does 240 potency, Fire 1 does 240 potency. Blizzard 3 does 260 potency, Fire 3 does 260 potency. Blizzard 4 does 310 potency, Fire 4 does 310 potency. Blizzard 4 also has a shorter cast time to boot. By that alone, you could argue that it makes no difference whether you use fire or ice magic. Besides, assuming you read the tutorial prompt, the description of Astral Fire just explains that it increases the potency and MP cost of further fire spells, but not by how much. If the player never bothers to compare the numbers, then for all they know, the power difference could be 5 or 10% by Astral Fire 3. And if that is the case, then Blizzard 4's shorter cast time would actually be worth around 12% of a damage gain over Fire 4. Now, the actual power difference is that Astral Fire grants 40, 60 and 80% more damage to your fire spells, so it's not even close. But it would be a much easier comparison if the tooltip just said so. The most likely origin of this kind of rotation is that, in other RPGs, it is pretty common for a mage to be allowed to choose which element they specialize in. Often, they are even rewarded for focusing on one specific element. However, the actual performance of such a rotation in Final Fantasy XIV is comparable to a paladin refusing to use magic, or a scholar thinking that summoning a pet is actually optional, or a machinist that thinks they're a gunner and doesn't want to summon their robot, and so on and so forth. Number 4. Single Target Doton Ninja. This one is rather straightforward, and like the Ice Mage, is caused by a misunderstanding. There are 3 different possible sources of this misunderstanding, so let's take them one at a time. First, Doton is a placed AoE, meaning it takes an extra time when you place it, and additionally takes once every 3 seconds, leading to a total of 7 ticks. This adds up to a combined 560 potency, which is less than Raiton's 650. However, if you don't understand how dots work, or how placed AoEs work, then you might not be entirely sure whether Doton strikes 7, 8 or 9 times. And if it did strike 9 times, it would do more damage than Raiton. Second, Doton is a 3 mudra ninjutsu and Raiton is a 2 mudra ninjutsu. Surely the 3 mudra attack is greater than the 2 mudra attack. This argument primarily stems from not actually reading the potencies, which sometimes can be because the player doesn't understand how potencies work. And finally, thirdly, before Endwalker, Doton actually did do more damage than Raiton, with Doton doing 9 times 100 potency in total, still with the weird extra tick at the start included, while Raiton did 800 potency. With Endwalker's release, Doton instead did 20 less potency than Raiton and still lasted 24 seconds. The fact that Doton lasted this long meant that ninjas could preemptively place Doton before a boss was pulled and still have all of their ninjutsus available for their opener proper. This sometimes led to some extra damage if the tank moved the boss into the Doton before it disappeared. As of patch 6.1, this is no longer possible, both because Doton's duration was reduced to 18 seconds, shorter than the ninjutsu cooldown. And Hide now, in addition to maxing out your ninjutsu charges, also deletes your Doton to prevent this behavior. Now, even if Doton did do enough damage to be competitive with Raiton, the idea of maintaining Doton meshes very poorly with Ninja's bursty rotation compared to Raiton's upfront damage, so it is probably very good that single target Doton is no longer a good idea. Number 5. Infinite Paradox Black Mage. This is actually a situationally good trick for Black Mages. However, the Infinite Paradox memes have greatly overshadowed its usefulness as a tool. The value of the Infinite Paradox is that, at a mild DPS loss for the Black Mage, they can move almost completely freely for an extended period of time. The reason why it isn't always endless is because it relies on certain cooldowns to maintain momentum, and if you have a larger amount of spell speed, then you will almost certainly outrun these cooldowns. The Infinite Paradox is often explained as an extremely long opener, but the long and the short of it is that you need 3 Umbral Hearts to get started. This is because to access Paradox, you need a Paradox marker, which is granted when you switch from Astral Fire 3 to Umbral Ice, or when you switch from Umbral Ice 3 with 3 Umbral Hearts to Astral Fire. From this point, the trick is to reach Umbral Ice 3 or Astral Fire 3, and then transposing to acquire the Paradox marker, and then using Paradox. The key is that Ice Paradox has no cast time, allowing you to use it on the move. As Transpose has a cooldown of 5 seconds, you need to stay in whichever state you are in for at least 2 GCDs per switch, and sometimes staying for 3 GCDs can let Transpose catch up again. A bit similar to the Iceman Samurai's relationship with Hagakure. Whenever you find yourself in Umbral Ice with a Paradox marker, you use Paradox followed by some filler, which often is Umbral Soul, but can be any instant cast really. Whenever it is available, you should use Sharp Cast, and it is often a good idea to set up Triple Cast or a Swift Cast if casted spells are coming up. Whenever you are in Astral Fire state, you need to find 2 instant casts to use, whether it is to use Paradox with Sharp Cast for a guaranteed fire starter, so you only need to spend 1 Triple Cast stack, or perhaps a Despair and a Xenoglossy to maximize damage while also maxing out Astral Fire. The general game plan is that you always want to exit Umbral Ice with 3 Umbral Hearts, and always enter Umbral Ice either already with a Paradox marker in hand, or by generating it by transposing into Umbral Ice from Astral Fire 3. This leads to interesting observations such as Ice Paradox increases Umbral Ice by 1. Despair does not spend Umbral Hearts, and neither does a Fire Starter Fire 3. Now, the benefit of mastering the Infinite Paradox rotation is that it is a rotation that is perfectly capable of functioning without ever stopping to cast properly, which makes it extremely handy to bring out in fights where you need to move a lot. Then you can always revert to a normal rotation once the high mobility phase ends. Notably, the Infinite Paradox rotation turns out to only be very slightly behind a proper rotation and damage output, assuming both run uninterrupted, which is perhaps similar to both Iceman and Dragon Kick in that, situationally, these rotations can come up when they provide some sort of utility in the moment. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can let the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel like these wonderful people here. Fun fact, a long time ago, Blizzard 1 actually applied a 40% heavy debuff to the target, slowing them down. This made it a lot more comparable to similar Ice Mage filler spells in other RPGs or even MMORPGs. The duration of this heavy debuff was long enough that in an open world situation, you might not need to reapply it. In contrast, Fire 1 did not apply a damage over time burning effect to the target at that time though.